This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created. To listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Jordan, welcome to the program. Great to have you.
Oh, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Well, this is another episode of Profiles in Leadership, and I am the host, Steve Anderson, and today we have Jordan Burton on the show. And Jordan is a seasoned executive assessor and interviewing trainer with over 17 years of experience. He specializes in training top venture capital and private equity investors and high-growth companies in hiring the best talent. Jordan is the co-founder of Talgo, where he manages relationships with industry giants like Sequoia Capital, Lee, and Palantir Technologies. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did get it right, yeah.
Okay, great. And Jordan is also a former partner at the renowned leadership advisory firm ghSMART and a former consultant at Bain Company. He's a graduate of Duke University and holds an MBA from Harvard Business School. So Jordan, great to have you on today, and really interested in picking your brain. And did I leave anything out there in the bio that you wanted to be?
I think you got the essence.
Let's roll right in. So, just thinking, I have to admit, this is a really interesting interview because I'm interviewing an expert on interviewing. So it's kind of like I feel a little extra pressure today. So hopefully I'll be okay. But, just give us a little bit about your background. We kind of, in the bio, we talked about, the experience you've had. But how does one become an expert in interviewing, and why that niche? So just explain how that came about.
Well, sometimes we have all great intentions of where we're headed in our careers, and opportunities find us. And that's what happened for me. So I had no designs on becoming an interviewing expert. I was, chugging along on a, very much business-centric career. I was management consultant at Bain Company, did that, had two kind of tours of duty there, pre and post business school. I had some time doing entrepreneurial stuff in the dot-com era, so I had gotten a taste for entrepreneurship and technology, and I loved that. I thought that I'd be startup CEO, maybe an investor, something like that. And then I had a boss of mine, sort of former boss when I was still in business school. He had joined this firm that was doing executive assessment, and they're still kind of the leader in this space. And he told me about this sort of data-driven approach to hiring and interviewing in this firm called ghSMART. And it intrigued me. It sounded like really just a powerful thing to be doing to help companies get leadership decisions right. And you can spend your career, pushing PowerPoint slides, telling them what markets to go after and competitive landscapes and cash flows and whatnot. But if you don't answer that critical question of who should be in charge of these critical enterprises, it's sort of the most important question. So I was intrigued by the content, but still not convinced. And his name's Randy Street, fabulous guy. He stayed on me for a couple of years and eventually convinced me to join. And 17 years ago, thus begins my career as a professional interviewer. And it's lots of twists and turns along the way, but kind of an unexpected left turn in my story. But I'm thrilled with the outcome.
Well, I think it's a pretty unique job title, so it's very intriguing to me. I do have a question on executive assessor. Are you assessing people that are already in executive positions, or are you assessing people to join firms or join companies to be at the executive level?
Largely the latter. It's both. So there are situations. So in my work as an executive assessor, I still do that. There's just a short list of clients where I provide that service directly, where I'm doing the interviewing. And that's largely private equity investors. And in those situations, there's two primary, call them use cases, situations where I would be engaged. One is a new hire. We're going to hire a new CFO for this portfolio company, or a new CEO, somebody in a critical leadership position. I'm typically interviewing one or two finalists and having this very deep conversation with them. There are also situations where these investors may be looking to buy a company. So there's an incumbent management team, and there's a process of getting to know those leaders. It's a little bit of a different way that we handle those situations, where it's not like a traditional job interview. It's learning more about the company as much as the person. But we do both. It's all about just getting to know human beings and what are their superpowers, what are the watch outs, what are the limitations, and kind of building a picture of a human being.
Now, you mentioned that it's that your style is based on a data-driven interview style, so to speak. As a right-brain thinker, that makes me a little nervous. So tell me what data-driven means, and how does that work into the interviewing or getting to know somebody process?
When most people think of data, they think of numerical content and spreadsheets and whatnot. So it's understandable that that's where our mind gravitates. But in this situation, data just means facts, things that we can learn about a person in human capital, in this sort of talent space, whether it's executive talent or talent at any level. The data really is the stories about the person. This is the things, the places they've been, the things they've done, the things they've accomplished, the products they've built, the revenue they've generated, the relationships they've built, the teams that they've developed. That is the data that we're looking for. And we would say data driven as opposed to intuition driven, as opposed to instinct driven. Unfortunately, so much of hiring and so much of interviewing is based on, do I like this person? Do I click with them? Do I feel a connection with them? And we would say, there's some value to just what your intuition tells you about a person, but we way over index on that. And when we say data, we say, let's actually learn about the facts of this person's story. That's where the decision should really rest. It should be based upon the truth of that person, as opposed to the in the moment, whether or not we feel like we click with them.
Unless you have some real mental struggles going on, we tend to kind of like ourselves. So the natural go-to is hire somebody like myself, and that's probably what you don't need.
Hiring in your own image. I would put it on the short list of the most significant issues with modern hiring processes. Just personal bias. I like this person because they're like me.
And doing a little research for this interview today, I've heard you say that the first question is never the best question. And, so I think a lot of people, they come up with these great questions. They ask a question, it's answered, and then they move on to something else. So describe a little bit about how you dig deeper with that.
Yeah, we are so frequently asked, what's your best interview question? And of course, if you provide that best interview question, that's going to get out there. There's actually blogs written that you can find every great thinker's favorite interview question. Well, any candidate can go read those, compile answers to them, and we're done. Yeah. The point is, we don't want to make this about an input output, that I ask a question and I ask you to press play on some response and I judge that response. It's all about initiating a dialogue. It's all about a discussion. And when we do executive assessments, these are conversations with leaders who've been in significant positions over much of their career, and we're diving into stories with a series of follow-up questions. So somebody tells us about some significant commercial win, landing a big customer to get some company off the ground or take it to the next level. We don't stop when they tell us that initial answer. We really dive in and understand the details of how they did it. What were some of the pivotal moments that were most challenging, that really made the biggest difference? What their unique role was in it, so that we avoid that trap of, like, a lot of people say, we did this, we did that. We really want to understand what this person did to make that happen. So it's all about unpacking these stories through curiosity, where we really get the richness, as opposed to that surface level response to the question.
Yeah, it brings up to mind, I've done quite a bit of advocacy work with legislators, and then also been in mastermind groups with CEOs. And you can see, like, you're having a decent conversation, then you ask them a question like, what does your company do? And they just gloss over and give this machine, response that they've probably said hundreds of times.
Sure.
The same thing with politicians. They're talking, and then all of a sudden they go into the points that they want to make, that they've said a million times, and you can just tell. So I would assume you don't want to be in an interview and have somebody go into that mode because it's pretty obvious when they do, I think.
That's right. And the fastest way to get there is to ask the most predictable questions that they've all prepared for. So a lot of when we train people on how to interview, we're trying to kind of disrupt the candidate's interview prep. If we go in there and say, why do you want this job? Or for an executive, I think the most common question that gets asked of senior executives, what would you do in your first 90 days here or first 180 days here, whatever it may be?
Right.
You're going to get that stump speech. You're going to get that prepared thing that, by the way, forward-looking question about the future, there's no burden of proof. They could paint a picture that has no resemblance to the way that they would actually behave, right? So we want to steer clear of just these very predictable, tell me a little bit about yourself. That is asking someone, can you just start talking while I form judgments about you?
Yeah, exactly. And my area of business was healthcare, and so
Yes,
I remember that I learned that if you let's say you're talking to somebody who you want to market physicians to increase your patient volumes or whatever, and you can say, do you have experience marketing physicians? And of course they're going to say yes.
of course.
But if you
Open-ended or closed-ended leading question. Yeah.
but if you say, give me two examples, one that was successful and one that was a disaster of marketing physicians, then they either have to make it up or they tell you the right story, true story, right?
Yeah, that's right. You hit on a point that's an important part of interviewing, which is balance. So many interviewers feel this pressure that I'm only allowed to ask questions about the great things, right? That there's something that's like offensive or wrong or terrible about asking somebody for things that didn't go well. And what's interesting is if you look at high performers, people who are doing great things in their career and rising up in levels and having tremendous impact on the world, they're typically the ones who are most open and talking about the disasters, the things that didn't go well, the mistakes made, the lessons learned. So I love the fact that you're focused on things that actually happened, and you're also giving a balance of positive stories and negative, let's call them negative stories, mistakes, missed opportunities, do-overs, and the like.
Likely be a red flag if someone couldn't come up with a mistake they made or when something went bad, right? Because you'd probably want an executive that's willing to admit that they aren't perfect or they did something wrong or they learned from a mistake.
Absolutely. Through media training and just through the process of a career's worth of interviews, a lot of individuals get trained to disguise those stories. We're supposed to spin the question into another positive. Somebody asked me for a weakness, I'm gonna take a strength and disguise it as a weakness. This would be something like an executive saying, well, I work too hard, or I'm impatient, which can sometimes mean it's a code word for I move really fast, right?
Right.
And we think that like we're supposed to dodge these questions. And I think it's up to the interviewer to create a safe space and to just have a polite discussion where we essentially say, we're actually interested in hearing about the true weaknesses, the true mistakes and missed opportunities. It's part of who you are. And we have a set of techniques that we train people on how to do that in a way that's not calling someone out for dodging it, but ensuring that the person on the other end knows, no, we really are talking about, we want to hear both sides of it. It's part of the complete picture and part of the data set that we're wanting to put together.
Have you ever been asked by a client, let's say somebody comes up with this great, amazing story, you think, wow, that's an amazing story. Have you ever checked it to see if it's true or if it's been, made more dramatic or better than it really was?
All the time. And there's a specific tool we use that's pretty well known called a reference. So one of the things that we do in our assessment work, and we certainly train companies to do, is just make sure you follow up with these stakeholders that we're talking about. So if you hear a story about the big sale, the big win that took the company to the next level, there were stakeholders, there were observers, there were eyewitnesses to this event. In that dialogue with this, call it an executive, it could be any level, any candidate, when they're telling you the story, make sure that you're gathering who were these other eyewitnesses, not in a heavy-handed way, but just in a way to say, there's an opportunity to verify these stories with other people who were there. And I think that if you just introduce the fact that there's going to be that kind of a follow-up from the get-go, it bathes the entire conversation in a bit more truth-telling, right? When someone knows that there's likely to be follow-ups. But yes, we actually do a lot of reference checking too, to follow up with these people and see not only just verifying the story, but also sometimes an individual may have blind spots, positive or negative, and this third party can help us, shine a different light on a story or on a person.
Well, I'm glad you brought up references because, I've been around a while and I can remember we used to do references all the time and everybody would just, give you this great information. Then we went through a stage of, all I can say is that they worked here to this date, and that's all I can confirm.
Yeah.
Where are we in the world of that now? Are people willing to talk in references?
I have done thousands of these over the years, and I have certainly hit that wall as well. Here's what I would say. So yes, there are a lot of companies, especially larger companies, that are going to have policies around what can be shared or not in references. Here's the thought experiment I would give you. Imagine one of the highest performers that you had on a prior team of yours, somebody that was like a really key person that you hired and mentored and managed, that at some point in their career, they were looking for a new opportunity. Maybe they'd already left you, or maybe they were in the process of doing that, but this person had some great opportunity in front of them. And imagine that person included you as a reference, or they reached out to you and said, hey, this new future employer is going to be reaching out to you. What we typically find when we are trying to do a reference on a high performer where there is this policy in place is the conversation goes something like this. I really wish I could tell you about Sarah and all the amazing things that Sarah did in our work together and the impact that she had and the value that she brought. But unfortunately, we have a policy. I'm not able to share all of those wonderful things. So I can just verify that she worked here.
Oh, you got a little bit.
Right.
So
It's typically clear.
Yeah, well, if they take the line of just the policy as written,
Yeah.
is that a red flag then? Would you consider that a red flag?
What I typically, but we're not doing just one reference. We're going to have a number of people that we're going to speak to. If I hear that kind of a party line again and again with no emotion, no, like, I wish I could say more, that positive version of I wish I could say more, yes, I'm starting to have concerns. If I have one reference that just holds a very solid line and it really does sound like it's policy driven, I'm not going to wave the red flag from one. I'm looking for a constellation of data points. This whole talent decision-making process is not about one conversation that is the nail in the coffin or the one that makes you hire. I want to see the pattern across the references.
I don't know if you're familiar with personality profiles, but like, DISC or some of the other.
Of course, yeah.
So one of the things that when you're looking for talent, is it good to ahead of time say, this is the personality type I'm looking for, to try and avoid that unconscious bias that I'm going to hire somebody like me. So you say, I'm looking for somebody who has these personality traits, and then just force yourself to stick to that no matter how great the person is that comes in with a different personality.
Sure.
Is that what you would recommend, or how do you do that?
So I would say, let's take the concept of personality trait and let's split it into two buckets. There is a set of personality traits that I would argue you do need to be very clear about what's needed in a role. So let's say that we're going to be hiring somebody. Let's get out of executive land and let's talk about like SDRs, like people who are going to be breaking into, like, cold calling, basically getting us leads through outbound networking. In that situation, there's a personality trait around comfort with rejection, around ability to quickly build rapport with a variety of different individuals, a determination and willing to stick with it, that I do want to be indexed on, right? So I think it's fine to say there's a personality trait that we know directly correlates with the results that we need in the role. If somebody is a wallflower, if somebody's very reserved, if somebody struggles with rejection, they're not going to be able to deliver the business result we need in this role. Now we're looking for a developer, software developer, and we happen to be a more extroverted type of person who really likes vocal team engagement. and we decide that we want to only hire people who share this personality trait of this extroversion, I think that you're at risk of creating a monoculture on your team. There's a variety of ways to develop software, and there's a variety of ways to work on a team. And the extroverted, bubbly, interactive kind of way isn't necessarily the only one. So the thing I would say is the personality trait directly linked to the business result that we need, or is it a personal preference that we have that leads us to hire in our own image? Does that distinction make sense?
Absolutely, and it brings that next point up that I would think is the clearer you are of what that position is and what the role should be and who should be in it going into it, I think would help you get there quicker.
What you just said is so important that it's like one of the key pillars of what we train on. I would say it might even, it's a candidate for the biggest missed opportunity in a hiring process is getting clarity on what you're hiring for. It's where I see gross underinvestment for most companies, certainly before we get engaged and work with them. Lots of hiring mistakes are made by not knowing what we're hiring for. What are the results we need? What's the business need that's underpinning this hire from the get-go?
I'd be interested in your experience on this too, because I think especially bigger companies, a lot of times the CEO that they let go, or maybe he resigns, or he's moving on, or she's moving on, whatever, and then they look for that, great white knight on the horse that's going to come in and just save the company. And I think that the data shows that those are rare that come in and really do a good job. You're almost better with hiring someone from within and going in that direction. So I'd appreciate
Hmm,
your experience about what you've seen,
sure.
because somebody totally from the outside isn't necessarily is going to be the savior, so to speak, that you're looking.
Yeah. I've worked with a handful of, call it more turnaround or distressed investors across my career from the get-go, working with investors who are specifically taking companies that are in a bad state and trying to make them much better and healthier and more productive. And there is this compulsion to say, let's find this mythical savior who's going to come in and turn things around. I am cautious when somebody is not specific about what they mean. I would say that if I look at the outcomes from external hires versus internal, that there isn't this clear bias for the internal person. I'd say, if anything, it might be the reverse. And the reason is the team that got us in this place, at least the roles that they're holding. There may be new roles for some of these people, but if we've got a company that's really, really struggling, we're often talking about a set of leaders who are not set up for success. They're not really the right person in the role that they're holding today, and change is needed of some kind. But I'm cautious about feeling like we found this one person who's going to be the cure for everything that ails us. What we like to do in those situations is say, let's actually go through the point of departure and the point of arrival. What's the state of affairs today? And where do we want to get? What are the actions that need to happen to get us there? There may be IT systems components to it. There may be cultural components of it. We may have a culture that's disgruntled and complacent and lacking in focus and accountability. There may be elements of process involved. There may be any number of levers to pull to get this thing on track. Let's find leaders, internal or external, who have a track record of being able to pull those levers, rather than saying, let's just simply look for, we need a turnaround person. Let's just bring in a turnaround person. That's where I start getting nervous. I'm like, let's get down to the level of the specific levers that we need to pull.
And I know this is a real general question, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you feel like companies that would come to you to help us hire the next CEO, are they companies that are in trouble and they need, somebody to help them get out of that? Or are they companies that are doing really well and then they're afraid of how can we possibly replace this person who's leaving?
The answer is absolutely both. If I look at splitting my world into doing interviews myself and training other people to do it on it. Let's start with the training part. Most of that work is training growing companies and the investors that back them on how to scale up. So when I'm teaching people about interviewing, it's usually about helping them clearly scope out leadership roles that are going to enable this organization to scale and grow effectively. It's rarely hiring into an organization that's massively struggling. Typically, companies that are massively struggling aren't doing a whole lot of hiring, and therefore their need for hiring training isn't quite as strong. But when I do the interviews myself, that's where we're talking about there's a couple of key leaders we do need to hire to get this thing back on track. And in those situations, certainly we're looking for the skill sets that correlate with call it turnarounds or call it sort of righting the ship. We certainly also do support of critical hiring decisions in growth companies. It comes down to like, is the investor largely, is their skill, is their primary investment thesis about backing and accelerating growing companies, or is it about course correcting companies that are undervalued, like assets, companies where there's unlocked potential, and having the right leadership team in can help these companies get on a growth trajectory. So the answer is you can do both, but it's typically executive level hiring in a turnaround as opposed to mass hiring at the junior and mid levels in a struggling company. It just doesn't happen as much.
So what do you enjoy more, doing the actual interview yourself, or do you enjoy teaching others to learn how to be better interviewers?
Oh, what a great question. I will say, I never want to be teaching people something that I'm not doing all the time. I will say my first love really is the teaching part of it. I've always enjoyed that. I guess it's just kind of this happy coincidence that I also happen to love interviewing. I would never stop, even if I did stop teaching, because I enjoy it so much. Um, so yeah, the answer really is I like both. I do say though, like, despite all the success and growth that we've had on the training side of the business, I'm not ever going to let go of doing the interviewing. I want to be deeply grounded in what it really means to have this dance with another person, to actually be practicing the skill set. Never want to be someone who's teaching something I'm not doing every day.
Just, I'm sitting here thinking about, because I've developed a lot of leadership development programs. And, I'm sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, we've missed this piece. I mean, why wouldn't we teach people how to interview, since so many people do that? And if they do it wrong, it's going to hurt the organization. So why not, spend some time? And so I love the idea. I love your niche. It's really valuable.
It's interesting. I've been asked this question. We actually start our training programs with presenting this crazy dichotomy that we take this thing, hiring, that we all know is like the most important thing. Anyone who's led anything or invested in anything knows that it's all about the talent. You could be as brilliant as you can be. You could have the best strategy in the world. And if you don't get the people part right, you're dead on arrival. Everyone agrees. And everyone also agrees that there's basically no training on this. The weird question is why? And I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. I have a hypothesis.
Okay, let's hear it.
It kind of comes back to, if you've ever read Thinking Fast and Slow, Kahneman,
Yeah.
there's this system 1 and system 2, this like instinctive judgments that we form, and then this more disciplined, data-driven thing. We are hardwired as human beings to do system 2 thinking with other human beings. We form judgments about people all the time. Casual interactions, social interactions, business interactions, you name it. We have this very deep groove and comfort with forming instinctive judgments about people, and we think we're right. We think that we've got this right. So it's almost like we forgive ourselves for not even asking whether there is system 2 disciplined, data-driven, slower approaches we could be using, because we have such comfort and such instinctive muscle memory around this snap judgment. And it takes somebody saying, wait, there's a better way. Check this out. Try this. There's a way to gather data. Don't let go of all of your instincts. They're there for a reason, but just quiet them and let's actually look at the facts. That's my hypothesis. We'll see.
I would agree with you. Another thing that comes to mind is, again, in bigger companies, it seems like the first point of entry is always like the HR person. And I've also heard from other people like the HR person turns them off before they even get to the, who they're going to be working with or whatever. So,
Yeah.
you see that a lot. Do you think it's important to go through an HR
Oh,
person, or should you go right to who's going to be managing you, or you're working with on the team?
I don't think there's two letters of the alphabet that I have a more complex relationship with than H and R.
Okay.
There is such a stereotype, and I think it's a deserved one, around HR as this kind of tactical, logistical, non-strategic function. When the reality is, there are some incredibly strategic, dynamic, high-powered, awesome people who wear the HR badge. You'll see chief people officer or people operations becoming more and more common. I think it's largely because people have this allergy to HR, and they have notions about this as the person that runs through comp and benefits and, a compliance type function. So I would strongly dissuade a company from putting a robotic, mechanical, non-strategic, traditional HR person in charge of such a critical business process as hiring, for sure. But you know what? There are some incredible HR leaders who do an amazing job of it, and they're the first person you'd want in front of somebody. There's a whole other conversation around who is the right person to have that first conversation, and I would certainly not say that the default should be any person, any one person. It should vary based on situation, but it's a sad state of affairs when there's these wonderful dynamic heads of HR who are painted with the same brush as this traditional paper pushing administrative HR legacy, right?
It just goes back to, you want the people that have the gift of doing what, the interviewing or whatever do it, not somebody that has a certain job title or whatever. So,
Yeah,
if you're managing your company well, you want the best person doing the best job. And if it's not the HR person who handles all the benefits and all that kind of stuff, then find somebody else who maybe's gone through your training or who's good at it from experience. So.
for sure. My hope for the world is that the talent, call it the people operations and talent function within an organization, is so strong and so central that it is considered to be a common path to CEO. It's funny, if you ask CEOs who've done this time and time again, I've had this conversation with a very large number of successful CEOs. You ask them, what is the job all about? And they'll tell you it's basically setting strategy and surrounding yourself with great people. That's it. All those functional skills that you built a career honing kind of go away. You're basically setting strategy, surrounding yourself with great people, and removing obstacles. And if you think about that, who better to take that seat than somebody who's awesome at surrounding themselves with great people? I would love to see a world where people ops was a path to CEO in most companies, but we're certainly not there yet.
Well, and I think that I've talked about this many times on the program with other guests, and I think in the past that a lot of CEOs have come up through the finance side of the business. And so just by generalization, they tend to be more analytical and more data and
Mhm.
more, that way. And I think there's a trend, correct me if I'm wrong, because you probably see more than I have, but it seems like the CEOs today there's room for right brain thinkers, and there's people looking for more of the right brain thinkers that are more, as you said, relationship builders, surrounding themselves with the right people, maybe less data driven or finance driven, because they can have people on the team that does that. Because
For
to keep
sure.
the talent and find the talent, you've got to be a relationship builder.
I think that the people skill, the talent skill is necessary, but not sufficient. There are certainly organizations where, the paths that we see, we do most of our work in technology. And I would say the most common paths are you come through the go-to-market side of the house, sales, revenue generation, or you come through the product side of the house where you're either technical yourself or you have a product management mindset. Certainly there are ones who come from finance as well. And I often get asked the question of, do you see a greater pattern of success in CEOs who come from one path or the finance path, any one of these paths over the other? And my answer is, tell me about the company. What are they trying to get done? If it's a complex financial turnaround, if there's this tremendous amount of systems and process and financial work to be done, someone who has that skill set that was forged through a career in finance and IT may be the right kind of leader. If this is something where it's like, we've got a great product, but really the name of the game is out competing a bunch of other really aggressive commercial organizations, we may need somebody who comes from the go-to-market side of the house. If it's all about innovation and who can build the best widget, and it really is about outside the box, like somebody who is all about thinking about the user experience, thinking about what from a product perspective is going to leapfrog competition, you probably want leadership with more of that product DNA. It's never like a one-to-one, one-size-fits-all kind of a thing, but it's context specific. It really is.
Well, you've probably got a lot of examples. The one that I remember, which is kind of a long time ago, but when Steve Jobs was kind of pushed out of Apple, and then the next CEO, and I forget the gentleman's name, but he came from Wall Street, and he was very, data-driven, technical, do it this way, do it that way, which was in complete contrast to the entire culture of Apple. And failed miserably, So I think that
That's
was
right.
Clear on what they needed.
And there are certainly examples of other organizations that had all the innovation in the world, and they had absolutely no discipline in terms of how they structured themselves financially and otherwise. And you needed somebody who had that background. But take a product space. I mean, Apple has redefined how many industries? Like 5 or 6 industries have been utterly reshaped by Apple. It all comes from innovator DNA. You have somebody who is just this brilliant, forward-thinking product person, and that's what won. And there are certainly examples of organizations that have won through the commercial side that really have just outflanked competition because of this unbelievable ability to sell, and that can win too.
So I'm sure you get this question asked you every time you do an interview, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What's your favorite interview question?
I am asked this question more than any other, I would say. And it's again, back to the thing, if I had a favorite interview question that was like, it always gets you to the great response, it's out on the web and people are going to prepare answers to it. I view my favorite interview questions as what tends to generate the best dialogue, what gets me to the stories that are the richest places to learn things. And those tend to be relatively simple questions. When we overpack our questions with qualifiers, conditions for what constitutes a good response, tell me about a time when you did X and Y under constraint Z and you needed to get A, B, and C results. When I overload my question, I'm getting junk answers. I'm getting candidates making up responses because they feel awkward of not being able to meet all my criteria. What's my favorite? Tell me the most awesome thing you did in your last company. What's your proudest accomplishment in your prior role? And it's funny, people who've gone through my trainings will be like, yeah, we do talk about proudest accomplishments a lot. It's a fabulous question. And some of the most amazing stories I've gotten from people have been when they've reflected upon these standout moments in their career that really tell the story of who they are. And here's why I would say that the proudest accomplishment and biggest mistakes, those would be candidates for my favorite questions. If you were to, and I would say this to your listeners, go break out a piece of paper, write down your 10 biggest professional accomplishments that you are proudest of, and write down the stories. Just jot down what were the things you did that delivered those accomplishments. Then take out a piece of paper and write down what were my biggest mistakes along my career and what were the root causes of those mistakes. When you do that exercise of just inventorying the standout moments, no qualifiers, not biggest this win or that win, just those 10 things, you will have a picture of who you are as a professional. That will be your balance sheet.
Great
so,
advice.
Yeah.
And on the flip side of that question, is there a question that you have asked that you see people struggle with a little bit more than other questions?
There are, it's funny. I kind of hinted at one. Some people really struggle to be self-critical. You ask some people for mistakes, missed opportunities, things they could have done better. You can phrase it 15 different ways. some candidates really struggle with those questions. And I actually have a blog about the 3 reasons why people struggle to answer those questions. I don't know, a lack of self-awareness. I'm unable to see myself in a critical light, lack of self-critique, or I do know and I'm uncomfortable telling you. I'm trying to deceive you. Lack of self-awareness, lack of self-critique, and deceptiveness. So I see the greatest struggles of, especially, let's call them weaker performing individuals, sharing an open self-critique. It's one of the reasons why I love asking questions about mistakes and weaknesses. High performers jump at them. They love them.
Yeah. So the next question would be, how do you, so when you interview somebody, and these are, good, tough questions, and people have to go deeper. They can't just, like you say, do the stump speech. And so they have to think about it. So when they come out of this,
Mhm.
do they feel like this was a really good interview, or do they feel like, holy cow, that guy really, pushed me to the limit? Because if you're looking for great talent, you're also trying to recruit them in a certain way to look at it too. So it's got to be,
Oh,
you got to push hard, but yet you don't want to scare them away. Or
yeah.
maybe the ones that get scared away are the ones you want scared away.
Steve, I love this question. And I actually don't get asked this question very much. It's a really important one. So there's a little difference between an interview with me and an interview with a company that I've trained. The interview with me is going to go about 4 to 5 hours.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. We're going to go through your whole story.
Yeah.
And I will say, I have had even fantastic candidates say, wow, I've never talked so much. I'm a little tired. But I think you will also hear them say, I've never reflected on my story so comprehensively. Like, I started to see patterns emerge as I looked at the stories from my career that I hadn't really stitched together before. The great ones will say this was a valuable, some have said this was like therapy. This was actually is helping me be a better leader to really comprehensively reflect on my story. Some of them will say it was a bit of a grind. I'll admit it, right? At the end of the day, there's hundreds of millions or billions of dollars at stake on the decision. So they're going to be spending a lot of time with me. When we train people, we're not training them on 4 to 5 hour interviews. And what we would say is, I want the candidate to come out of that interview saying, wow, this person was so engaged in my story. I felt like I would have told them anything. They seemed so interested in what I had to say. I probably shared some things that I maybe I shouldn't have. I don't know. It felt so comfortable. And it's not that they should or shouldn't have. They should feel like, I'm glad that this person knows these things about me. They're so good at getting this data. If they come away and say that this is a great opportunity, this is a great fit, I trust them. And if they look at those stories that I told and they say, this is not going to be a happy home for me, I trust them. I'm glad I shared this information. It felt enjoyable. It was an experience of getting to reflect on myself. I want candidates to come away having an awesome experience. But honestly, Steve, I want them to come away going, this is a selective organization. They asked me a lot of questions. They really dug in. Why do I want them to think that? High performers want to work with other high performers. If you go in and you just ask a bunch of softballs and you don't dig in, high performers can smell that. And they don't want to join a team that hasn't been vetted. They are using their experience as a proxy for the quality of your team. Impress them with your selectivity. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I hired a CFO once, and I did it over a 6-month period of time, to where when I finally offered her the job, her comment was, well, it's about time. It's like, he goes, how many times did you need to talk to me and have other people? But sometimes those, really valuable positions, like you say, you want the person to feel like you care about them and you're interested in them, whatever. Also,
100%.
you also want to get to know this person as much as possible, because, you know, I mean, let's face it, people at this level can be good actors. I mean, it's like an audition.
Oh, for
You come
sure.
in and just like, oh man, this person's unbelievable, and then you get them in the company, and you go, I don't really like this person, So, whether it's multiple hours or multiple days or whatever, I think really digging deeper than the typical 20 to 30-minute interview is probably a good idea.
That's true. And I will say, I think most certainly a lot of investors, they say, okay, this is such an important decision that we should put somebody through a 3-month experience of 15 or 20 redundant interviews. It's a total grind and everyone should be okay with that because of the value at stake. No, I don't think you need to put somebody through 15 of anything. Let's have a short set of very engaging, deep discussions, ideally different discussions that go after different aspects of the role. So I wouldn't conflate rigor with a grind. It's like we want to get all this great data. We want to hear this person's stories, but we don't want to make this just like a death march.
So how do you know when a CEO or a high-level executive is successful? Is it because of the outcomes that you've identified they've accomplished, or is it because the people will take a bullet for them that work for them, that they really like this person? Is it a combination of the both? How do you evaluate that this is a really successful CEO?
At the end of the day, organizations have stakeholders. Typically, I mean, there's the obvious ones. There's the owner, there's the board, there's a community that they serve, there's customers. And ultimately, what I would say is a person is successful when the stakeholders in that organization deem that that person is successful. There's something very simplifying about working with the investors that I often do this work with, because there really is a pretty quantifiable measure of success. Did they deliver the results that we needed to deliver in order for this investment to be successful? I think the great investors that we work with do think more broadly than just the number. And they think about that broader stakeholder community and is this success sustainable? But it's, at the end of the day, I would say take the people who are most vested in this organization's success. Do they deem them effective? That's largely the ownership, the financial side of it, the employee base, whether that's a happy, productive group that is motivated and moving forward. And then, of course, there's a community that's served directly and indirectly. Our customers happy, our partners happy, our vendors happy. I think that you could put together a pretty simple, we would say there is a document you put together that quantifies what are those results that we want this person to deliver. And so that's part of our practice. When we do an assessment, we look a year, 2 years out, has this person delivered against this document that we created at the outset?
And I think you may have answered this already, but I just want to go back to make sure that we answered it. So how does one avoid those unconscious biases?
Yeah, there's a few tools, mechanisms throughout the process. It's critical. I think unconscious bias is definitely a candidate for sort of the most pernicious and most intractable problems in hiring. From the get-go, let's make sure that we have a document. We call it a target. It's essentially a set of results and a set of very clear competencies. This is not your boilerplate stuff of like, oh, we need a team player, we need a great communicator, we need somebody smart, we need somebody who works hard, but like very specific to this role. What do we need to get done, and how do we need to get it done? Make sure that that document is as objective as possible, and it doesn't include language that is going to skew towards, like when people start saying we need a real field general who's going to take the hill, we've already introduced bias because mental imagery is going to call to mind male candidates. So we want to make sure that this document objectively specifies what success looks like and does not contain language that even subconsciously skews us towards a certain demographic or other group. So I don't want, like, we need someone who has this kind of a background. Nope. What's the thing we need to get done? In our interview lineup, we need to make sure that everyone is there seeking data and not impressions. I would say certainly for companies who want to operationalize bias mitigation, that's about having a structured interview process where every candidate for a role is going through the same process. We don't tip the scales for certain candidates that we like and ask them different questions. Structured interviewing. Making sure that the rapport that we build is something that we do with every candidate. We don't bond with somebody over the sports game that just happened where we've tipped the scales and we form a better connection with somebody who shares our interest in sports. There's certainly all sorts of things around what we do with the data that we collect and making sure that we are being as objective as possible and saying, what's the evidence that suggests this person can deliver on these aspects of the role? And then I think finally, when you're making decisions, making sure that you have, whether it's the person moderating that discussion, it's often the hiring manager themselves, is directly but supportively calling out when they hear someone projecting something based upon a school they went to, based upon some connection that they had in the course of their interview. Like, what do the facts say, folks? What do the facts say? Just a few levers for bias mitigation.
Really
yeah.
helpful. I mean, it's you can all think of things like, oh my gosh, I love that band too. Okay, now they're rung up because we like the same music band or something.
For sure.
I see how it can happen. So Jordan, in anticipation of our discussion today, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you want to be sure and get in the program?
Well, I certainly would love to let people know if they want help from us, how they can do that.
Please.
That's all right to do. So we have a program, Talgo On Demand, which is essentially a way that you can learn a set of tools for each step in the hiring process, from role definition to sourcing candidates through the assessment, interviewing, referencing, decision-making. Very digestible. These are like interactive experiences where we're short videos of us explaining a concept, and then you're applying it with a quiz. You're watching us actually use it in a recorded interview. So you can go through this curriculum at your own pace and then have a live experience with myself and my co-founder, Matt, to actually do this in real life. You can't learn interviewing just by watching video clips. So we would invite those who are interested to find us at talgo.io, and we'd love to teach you all the tricks of the trade of making great human capital decisions.
Awesome. Now, Jordan, usually at this time of the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question. And that question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
What is a pearl of wisdom on leadership? Can I share two pearls?
Absolutely.
One pearl would be, if you are in a position of leading teams or building teams, prioritize that number one in your day. If you have found yourself complaining about the work that you're doing in sourcing candidates and interviewing, and you're tempted to pitch it over the fence to a recruiter or just put it on the web and hope people find you, take this job seriously. It really is your most important job. Take ownership of the team that you build and view it as your most important role. Your success or failure is a function of the quality of that team. I would also say the other pearl would be, regardless of whether you're in a leadership position or not, be authentic, and be authentic with other human beings. Get curious to learn about people, whether it's an interview or not. Approach every interaction that you have with another person as an opportunity to get to know someone, meet them where they are. Suspend your judgments. Just approach it from first principles. Who is this person? What are they all about? What do they bring to the table? And I think that just removes the kind of transactional lens that we can often put in front of everything that we do professionally and otherwise. Be human and get curious.
That is very well said, and I love the word curious. I do think that the best leaders that I've seen are people that are just genuinely curious about you, your what you've done, your family, your experience, about anything, and it's fun to talk to that person like that takes an interest in you and what you've done, as opposed to all the things they've accomplished, right? So I think curious is a great word.
Absolutely.
Well, Jordan, this has been a real pleasure. I sure have enjoyed our discussion, and
likewise.
Unique niche and something that I just think there's huge opportunity, because I think it's a forgotten, or maybe something that we don't think enough about it. And I know that I'm going to go right back and in my leadership development programs, I help with clients. So we're going to have an interviewing.
Well, give me a ring if we can help.
I'd love to. So thanks for your time today. Really
Thank you, Steve.
I learned a lot, and hopefully we run into each other down the road.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.